Hey YouTube. Today I have for you another deck tech. It is Lurrus of the Dream Den. This is going to be the commander, so we're not going to deal with companion for this deck. It is a Persist combo deck that relies on stacks pieces to slow down the game while you can assemble your combo. Lurrus himself has lifelink, and during each of your turns, you may cast a permanent with a converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard. How we're going to leverage this is by milling and discarding our hands to leverage value and be able to cast a combo piece or stacks piece during each of our turns using Lurrus' ability. First, we need to be able to cast our spells, which means that we need lands. So, as far as the non-basics go, we have Command Tower, Lazotep Quarry, Gaia Reach Sanitarium, and Buried Ruins. Now, you might think that that is a low amount of non-basic lands, but that is purposeful. These are probably the most important ones, which is why we play them. Command Tower is obviously just a rainbow land, which is great. Lazotep Quarry is mainly for the sacrifice ability, so that way we can protect our creatures from being exiled by sacking them. Gaia Reach Sanitarium is just a land as a card draw, which is very nice, and Buried Ruin can act as a second way to get back a combo piece or stacks piece from the graveyard if we've already expended Lurrus' ability, or Lurrus has been hated off the board too many times. Outside of our non-basic lands, we run 13 plains, and we run 15 swamps. And that is it for the land base. You might be thinking that is an awful few amount of non-basic lands. And you'd be right. We play a card that cares about us not having non-basics, which we'll get to later. We need to be able to cast our spells, and that means we still need to ramp. Even though this deck has a severely lowered average CMC compared to a lot of other decks, we still rely on mana ramp and casting multiple spells per turn, so we need to be able to cast them. We have Dark Ritual, which is mainly in the deck only to cast Lurrus for 1 mana. This is nice because then we can spend the rest of our mana to add card advantage engines or stacks pieces to the board. We have Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone, Talisman of Hierarchy, and Orzhov Signet as ways to create white and black mana. We also have Springleaf Drum at 1 mana, which you have to tap an untapped creature to activate, which usually isn't a problem, seeing as Lurrus is most of the time just sitting on the back line. We, of course, also have a Sol Ring. Then we have 3 colorless artifact providers. So we have Prismatic Lens, Mind Stone, and Everflowing Chalice. Everflowing Chalice is mostly in here as a scalable resource so that we can expend our extra mana to make a larger Everflowing Chalice. And the other 2 are just in here to bump up our mana ramp. Mind Stone being able to be cracked for a card later is very nice, and Prismatic Lens being able to filter our mana, especially with how many basics we run, can be nice at times. Now that we've ramped, we have to draw cards. Lurrus, with its ability, allows us to be able to mill as a sort of virtual card draw, but we still want to play ways in order to get cards into our hand, since Graveyard Hate can severely impact this deck. First off, we have Dark Confidant, which is basically a Phyrexian Arena in this deck, except for the fact that you lose life equal to the converted mana cost of the card on top of your library, which most of the time is going to be 1 or 2 in this deck. We have Brainstone, which allows you to draw 3 cards and then put 2 back on top after you sacrifice it. Lurrus being able to repeat this card ensures that you're never Brainstorm locked, while also being able to filter through the top 3 cards of your deck any turn you need to for 3 mana, casting it, and then tapping and sacrificing it. Mask of Memory allows us to attack with the few small support creatures that we have and gain some incremental advantage by drawing 2 cards and then discarding 1. Discarding a card is a small cost in this deck, seeing as we can utilize our graveyard heavily with Lurrus. We also have Signed in Blood and Night's Whisper, which are virtually the same card in this deck, allowing us to draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. The life loss might actually be able to benefit us in certain situations, such as Vilis Broker of Blood, which has the line of text, if you were to lose a life, draw that many cards. So, you can, with Lurrus, or with Vilis on the field, and Night's Whisper, draw 4 cards. We also have another large draw in Peer into the Abyss. Peer into the Abyss is designed for late-game scenarios where you can draw half your deck hoping to find the last 2 pieces of a combo you might need. Smuggler's Copter is the final draw engine in this deck, allowing us to draw a card when it attacks or blocks, and then you have to discard a card. Since we don't mind our cards being in the discard pile, we run Codex Shredder in order to mill another card each turn, which allows us to gain further access to our library into the discard pile. We have Ripples of Undeath, which at the beginning of our pre-combat main phase, we mill 3 cards, and then we can pay 1 and 3 life to put one of those cards into our hand. Though 3 life isn't necessarily something we'll be looking to do very often, however, this will allow us to gain more selection with Lurrus' ability, but also be able to scoop up a card that we're not able to reanimate with Lurrus if we need to. Now, we have a more controversial card here in Mesmeric Orb. This one I have found many players really dislike, seeing as it discards the top cards of their deck when they untap as well. I'm only trying to use it to discard my own deck, and if it would say only me, I would actually play that card over Mesmeric Orb, because it draws a lot of removal and hate. The only benefit in that is that people are spending their removal to destroy a card that I can easily reanimate with Lurrus if it becomes important in the late game. I try to avoid playing tutors because they make games substantially more linear, but we still play a few to make sure that the deck can come together, seeing as the Persist combo takes quite a lot of pieces to get going. We have Wishclaw Talisman. We have Demonic Council, which you can only search for any card if you have Delirium. However, a demon isn't necessarily the worst thing that you could look for, seeing as we have Villas in the deck. We have Final Parting, which gets a card into your hand and one into the graveyard, which is practically a tutor for 2 with Lurrus. We have Buried Alive to search our deck for up to 3 creatures and put them into the graveyard. This can allow us to get pretty much our entire combo, and with some reanimation cards that we have that we'll see later, you can actually search 3 and then reanimate all 3 of them in some situations. And then we also have Unmarked Grave, which allows us to just entomb a card, but is substantially cheaper than Entomb. This deck could benefit from a lot of upgrades, but they would be quite financially costly, and we are not looking to do that in this deck, as I try to keep my decks of a lower budget just to limit their power and play some more interesting cards. So we need to be able to stop our opponents from winning the game or pummeling us before we can win the game, so we do play some removal. We have Myers Grasp, which we're most likely trying to attach to a creature with toughness of 3 or less. That way we can repeatedly use it with Lurrus. We're not trying to just limit the size of a creature. We have Ossification, which when it enters the battlefield, we enchant a basic land. We have many basic lands, so this is very easy for us to use. And then you exile a target creature until Ossification leaves the battlefield. It can also target planeswalkers, but that's a niche scenario. We have Darksteel Mutation, which removes all of its abilities and turns it into an 0/1 indestructible bug. This is very good for attaching to commanders or other creatures that have strong abilities that the table can then politic and hopefully not block and allow to just stay on the board for the rest of the game. We have a Curse Marauder. Now, while this doesn't necessarily target a specific creature, this allows us to whittle down our opponent's board by repeatedly casting the Accursed Marauder and sacrificing itself to its own ability. For more efficient, non-permanent removal, we also have Swords to Plowshares. It's just the most efficient way to remove a creature in the game. We also have Soul Snare, which is something that we can reanimate and allows us to exile a creature attacking us. This card is really good at deterring our opponents from attacking us, since we can then exile it to Soul Snare and also reanimate it and return it to the battlefield, making it substantially more costly to attack us. We also have Artifact and Enchantment removal in Seal of Cleansing and Cathar Commando. Both of these cards are able to be recast with Lurrus, so in having less specific types of removal, we still have repeated ways to get that removal. We have 2 pieces of Graveyard Hate in Lion's Sash and Nihil Spellbomb. I love to play graveyard decks, and most of my decks have something to do with the graveyard. Not everybody has the same enjoyment that I do. However, if I do run across someone who is utilizing their graveyard as much as I do, I would like to exile their graveyards. And then we have 1 board wipe in Austere Command. Austere Command is generally going to be used to destroy all creatures with mana value 4 or greater, and then most likely enchantments, seeing as we have small creatures and a lot of artifacts that we would like to keep around. However, sometimes we can just use this to destroy all creatures, or if an opponent is playing an enchantress or artifact deck, we can attempt to blow those up as well. Now, we're going to try and play small, light stacks pieces that gain us incremental advantage while slowing down our opponents. First of that example would be Dampening Sphere. Dampening Sphere makes it so that lands that would tap for 2 or more mana just produce a single colorless instead. In addition, every time a player casts a spell other than their first, it costs 1 more for each spell that they've cast this turn, so it's essentially an anti-storm card. We also have Thorn of Amethyst and Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. While this also makes our non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast, most of the spells in our deck are very low mana value, which allows us to still be able to cast multiple spells per turn, while hopefully slowing down our opponents who have larger mana value cards. We also play a Phyrexian Revoker to stop activated abilities of a chosen name. We can then toggle this by sacrificing this creature and then recasting it with Lurrus to change the named card. This allows us to shut off any specific ability that we're looking for on the battlefield at any time. We have Blind Obedience to slow down aggressive decks trying to ram us down before we are able to cast our combos. We have Vexing Bauble. Vexing Bauble is one that I didn't think was going to pull its weight, but it turns out there are a lot of abilities these days, such as Cascade, that allow opponents to cast spells for free, and Vexing Bauble has earned its spot in the deck. If no one else at the table is doing degenerate things like casting their spells for free, we can just crack it to draw a card. We have further graveyard hate in this position with Dauthi Voidwalker, which if a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, they exile it with a void counter on it, and then I can sacrifice Dauthi Voidwalker to play one of those cards without paying its mana cost. Now, the best part about Dauthi Voidwalker is that the counters stay on when Dauthi leaves. So I can repeatedly use Lurrus to cast the Dauthi Voidwalker again and gain access to the entire pool of cards exiled with Dauthi Voidwalker. Another piece of graveyard hate here we have is Silent Gravestone. Cards can't be targeted by spells or abilities. This is something that you have to be careful with casting, seeing as it can shut off some of your reanimation abilities. However, it does not shut off Lurrus's ability, because Lurrus's ability does not target anything in the graveyard. It just says you may cast one. Unfortunately, Silent Gravestone, in removing itself, exiles all cards from all graveyards, so we won't be using that activated ability pretty much ever. We're going to want to find another way to exile this card, or sacrifice it, or otherwise destroy it. And then the reason that we play so many basics is because of Wintermoon. Players can't untap more than 1 non-basic land during their untap step. Now, this card seems very toxic, and it might be. However, I think punishing players who are trying to play very high colored decks versus the more monocolored decks, or decks that aren't running so many expensive dual lands, it gains you an advantage in that regard. Now, we need to be able to protect our combo pieces and Lurrus. So we have cards like Benevolent Bodyguard, Skrell Defector Might, Swiftfoot Boots, and Kaya's Ghost Form. This might not seem like a lot of protection, but you have to remember that we can recast them with Lurrus's ability, especially since they are all permanents. Benevolent Bodyguard sacrifices itself to gain target creature protection from a color of my choice until the end of the turn. Kaya's Ghost Form will allow the card to come back if it is destroyed or exiled. Skrell Defector would be substantially better as a Mother of Runes. However, Mother of Runes is $6, and Skrell is probably 50 cents. With such a minor difference, and only having to pay 2 life or a white mana to activate its ability, it's generally not worth the upgrade for me. Swiftfoot Boots is also another card that I really enjoy in the deck for giving Lurrus Hexproof. Giving Lurrus Hexproof substantially negates the ability to remove the Swiftfoot Boots and Lurrus, because you have to have both of those cards in your hand at the same time, or have players working together to destroy Lurrus. Because otherwise, you can cast and re-equip the Swiftfoot Boots on your next turn. 2 of my favorite other defensive cards in this deck come in the form of Kami of False Hope and Children of Corliss. Kamiya False Hope is the best one out of the two, essentially being a color-shifted Spore Frog, preventing all damage that would be dealt during this turn by sacrificing Kamiya False Hope. Children of Corliss does a delayed version of this by being able to gain life equal to the amount of life you've lost that turn by sacrificing Children of Corliss. This allows you to, once during each turn rotation, prevent combat damage to yourself, meaning that a lot of players are going to have to work together to swing into you in order to deal you damage. Most players won't be willing to do this because someone has to eat the Kamiya False Hope, and then someone else has to swing at me in order for Kamiya False Hope to not be as effective. These cards can be repeatedly cast with Lurrus, which makes it very difficult to get through Lurrus's board. Since we are looking to combo, we play Grand Abolisher and Defense Grid as ways to prevent our opponents from messing with our stuff while we're trying to win the game. Grand Abolisher is a substantially better version of Defense Grid, however having 2 copies in the deck does allow us to have a better chance of finding one of those when we're ready to go for the win. The reason that we don't play Silence in the deck is because it is an instant, which is not something that we can recast with Lurrus. Sticking to only permanents, we can cast these cards again if our plan is foiled. Taking a look at some of the reanimation spells that we had talked about earlier, we have Tashar, Ancestor's Apostle. Whenever you cast a historic spell, return target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Since we play so many artifacts, this will allow us to essentially reanimate all of our creatures, with very few exceptions. We additionally have Savine's Reclamation and Dewdrop Cure, both of which return cards with mana value 3 and 2 respectively from your graveyard to the battlefield. Savine's has Flash, allowing us to use it from the graveyard, which gives it more synergy with the deck as a whole, since it most likely is going to get milled. Dewdrop Cure was the card I was talking about earlier that has synergy with Buried Alive, since for gifting a card, you can return up to 3 target creatures with mana value 2 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield, essentially for 6 mana, allowing you to get 3 creatures with 2 CMC out of your deck and onto the battlefield. The final card is Animate Dead. Animate Dead allows you to reanimate something like a Villas for card draw, or more importantly, it has a combo that we'll look at later. Now for the main combo of the deck. As I had mentioned earlier, this is a Persist combo deck, very similar to my Grumgully the Generous Persist combo deck, which I'll put up in the iCard. For the Persist creatures that we play the best one, which is Lesser Masticore, and we also play Putrid Goblin. These are the 2 cheapest Persist creatures in the colors, which is why we play them. We do not play a ton of Persist creatures like we might for Grumgully, because we have access to them all throughout the game with Lurrus' ability. Now, in Persist Enablers, we have Vizier of Remedies and Thran Vigil. Vizier just negating the -1 counters that are placed onto the creatures when they come back, and Thran Vigil allowing you to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature when a creature leaves the battlefield. Now, there have been some questions that I've had in my local playgroup as to whether Thran Vigil actually works with Persist, and it does, because when a creature is reanimated with Persist, there is no time between which it has left the graveyard before it is on the battlefield. So it is a legal target to put a +1/+1 counter on, even though the creature that it saw was the creature that is gaining the +1/+1 counter, the same one that left the graveyard. For sacrifice options, we have Viscera Seer, but we also have Altar of Dementia, which simply wins the game with the combo by milling your opponents out. Viscera Seer, you need another piece of the combo in order to win, such as a Zulaport Cutthroat, which will have each opponent lose 1 life, and you gain 1 life whenever another creature dies. We also have another piece for Lesser Masticore in Grinding Station, which does the same effect as Altar of Dementia, milling your opponents out. The difference between the Viscera Seer Zulaport Cutthroat combo and Altar of Dementia and Grinding Station is these 2 can be great value engines throughout the game, aside from winning the game, allowing you to mill yourself to find the combo pieces you need to win the game. There is a single other backup win condition that I had mentioned earlier here in Leon and Relic Warder. This is also why we play Animate Dead. These 2 cards together create an infinite loop of dies triggers, reanimation triggers, enters the battlefield triggers, and I suppose exile triggers. In combination with these and another creature in a graveyard, which you must have, you can infinitely reanimate the Leon and Relic Warder from your graveyard. It comes in, and then you choose Animate Dead to exile it. Animate Dead is exiled, so the Leonin Relic Order is sacrificed. Since the Leonin Relic Order was sacrificed, the Animate Dead comes back, allowing you to reattach it to Leonin Relic Order. This gives you infinite dice triggers for something like Zulaport Cutthroat. Or, you can also use Altar of Dementia, so that when the sacrificed Leonin Relic Order trigger goes on the stack, you can sacrifice it to the Mill 3 before you have to sacrifice it to the Animate Dead trigger, allowing you to mill your opponent for 1 apiece for each part of this loop. Please leave a comment below giving me suggestions, or just your general opinion on the deck. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.